My name is Bob Babbitt, and welcome to Babbittville Classic Rewind, a collection of my favorite interviews with some of the legends of endurance sports that have aired over the past 3 decades. I'm hoping you will enjoy these interviews as much as I do. As always, endurance lives here.
During that weekend, I got to spend a little time with Bob Roll, and he was telling me about going down to Boone, North Carolina for a little one-on-one training with Lance Armstrong, 800 miles or so in 8 days. Well, was that a lot of fun riding with Bob?
Well, he is. I had morale there like you wouldn't believe. It was a very interesting experience. First of all, the training there is absolutely fantastic. Probably the best in the country the best in the States that I've ever seen. The traffic is minimal and very nice and cooperative. But to have Bubka there, 6-7 hours a day, just cracking jokes and making fun of every little thing that he saw. I mean, it makes a 6-hour ride feel like an hour and a half ride. So it was, and then not to mention the times off the bike. I mean, when we would cruise into town, and we were in the sticks in like North Carolina. This was early on. I renamed the training camp. It's now called the Tour de Deliverance.
Hope everybody had a great training and racing weekend. If you did the San Diego Marathon, congratulations. Those 8,000 of you folks out there running the marathon in half. Paul Huddle, how the heck are you?
Babbitt, I'm doing absolutely fantastic here in the swampland of Claremont, Florida.
As well you should, Huddle. Claremont, Florida. Yeah. So you're doing a little camp there.
Yes, we did a little triathlon camp out here. Had a good time. A lot of happy campers.
Hey, so Huddle, what if I told you that our first guest did the Tour de France 4 times, rode for 7-Eleven, Motorola, Team Z, first American to compete in the Tour de France and a Mountain Bike World Cup, finished Paris-Roubaix 7 times. What'd you think about that?
Author,
yes,
commentator. You must be talking about, is it Bobke or Bubka?
Bob Roll, you need to clear that up.
It depends.
It depends who the heck's saying it.
Exactly. If you're a Flemish bike fan from Western Belgium, you say Bobke.
Bobke.
If you're one of my teammates, you say, "Get your hands off of my plate." If you have been reading my articles, it's Bobke, and I decided that I would just adopt that. I would just go with Bobke because it was the American pronunciation of a Flemish name, and then I decided that I had gained so much weight since I stopped racing, I'd be Blobke. So.
I love that. Well, Blobke, I remember hearing some stories from Scott Molina, Ironman champion. You guys went to high school together?
Well, we were rivals at high schools in the same district, and both cross-country and track runners.
Wait. You were a runner?
You ran track and cross-country?
Yes.
Nobody probably got in your way.
Well, Scott was a way ahead, so,
And this
Scott Molina was way ahead of all the rest of us. So
was this in Pittsburgh or Danville?
He grew up in Pittsburgh. I was a little bit further to the west, up in the Diablo Valley. But, yeah, he went to a Catholic school called De La Salle, and they had a fantastic running program. And one of the best high school runners in the history of California, Rich Kimball, came from there. And Scott Molina also was another standout. But I was a couple years younger than Scott, but I definitely had to race against him on a regular basis, and that was always a very unpleasant experience. He was awesome at running. He could run all day long.
He really could. And now, did you ever ride with him?
Well, he started to do triathlon training when I was just getting into road cycling, and so we rode huge miles together.
What a surprise!
All over Northern California.
So you guys would just go out, and did you guys know what to buy bike-wise, or were you guys riding some 30, 40-pound pieces of crap?
We had no idea what we were doing, but we would ride for 2 or 3 days and visit our relatives all over Northern California, spend the night.
Wait, so you guys
have
would just
5 or 6, chickens and keep going.
So wait, you were just
now, Bob.
Yeah.
What got you into cycling to begin with? I mean, I can see Molina. There's no future in running, and maybe seeing this triathlon thing. But what got you into road cycling?
Well, actually, I had these jobs all over the San Francisco Bay Area: a cook, a carpenter, night watchman, and I figured out I could actually get to my jobs more quickly on a bicycle than in a car because the traffic is so heinous. So that's how I started riding bikes, was to commute to work, actually.
And so you and Molina would just say, hey, let's go and ride for about 3-4 days and stop at relatives' houses along the way.
Yeah.
And you would what, ride 100 miles a day or way more? At least.
100 miles on the off day.
That is so funny.
We rode to Chico one time from Pittsburgh and spent the night at his girlfriend's house and rode home the next day.
God.
Oh, my God.
Which is like 280 miles. It was crazy.
Now, Bob, I'm assuming you're not sponsored at this point. So what
No,
kind of
no.
bike,
We were sponsored
what kind of
by our
bike are
friends
you
in
riding, and what kind of clothing are you wearing?
I had one jersey, one pair of shorts. They got pretty gamey after a while, but
when they turn green, you got rid of them?
yeah, it was mild climate, luckily, pretty mild. But yeah, it was
Scott
very
had some
Spartan.
stories. Go ahead.
Some stories?
No.
Scott, I was going to say, Scott had some stories about you teaching him the value of wool.
Well, my mom had these sweaters
Yeah.
that were like alpaca, and vicuña and cashmere, and they were awesome. They were fantastically warm, and when we would ride in the winter, we wouldn't cut down our miles, but we would just put a bunch of layers on.
So you'd use your mom's sweaters?
My mom's sweaters, yeah. Don't tell her where they all went.
You were riding with your mom's sweaters.
Yeah.
And you were loaning some of those to Molina.
Molina was like, that's nice, that's warm, that's awesome. But he was the first to get sponsored, so then I started to bum clothes off of him, the old J. David team.
Oh, if you have some of that stuff, it's worth some bucks, baby.
Is that right?
Oh, yeah.
I'll look in the archives.
Yeah, because that guy went to jail, and all that stuff is worth a lot.
All right.
It's worth a lot more than he is.
A lot of cigarettes.
Yeah, you can get a lot of cigarettes in jail. So, Bobby, as a cyclist, and obviously you were a guy who could go long, in the U.S., the only way to make a living was as a crit rider, which doesn't seem like it fits your style back then. So is that what led to Europe?
Yeah, I mean, honestly, I wanted to race in the, where the best guys were.
Yeah.
And it's being like a basketball star in Mongolia was road racing in the United States.
Right.
It didn't have that much appeal to me. I just wanted to race against the best guys in the biggest races. So that's the main motivation. Also, I was horrible in the United States. It was so bad.
Really?
I don't know why I thought I could do good in Europe, but I
was going to say, if you're bad in the U.S., what makes you think you're going to go over to Europe and dominate?
I know. Well, it's hillier, more mountainous races, a lot longer races that suited me.
More suffering.
A lot more, yeah.
Now, Molina was telling me that he was getting postcards from you, from Europe, and you were living under bridges and just trying to figure out how to hook on with teams and make a living.
Well, I had a tent, and I thought that was,
that's pretty sweet.
That was good living compared to what I had been doing with Scott in Northern California. So I was like, dude, I'm on Club Med time over here. You got to get some of this. Nice.
So,
and it's interesting. They have a banquet, after the races in Europe. So if you show up and pay, 20 cents to do a bike race, usually you would get a meal afterwards. So I would eat 3 or 4 days worth of food and
at one time.
At one sitting, so I could survive until the next race.
Were you one of those guys who showed up with a box to bring the stuff home?
Just my stomach.
Nothing got carried away.
No.
Love that. Now, when did you hook up with your first team?
7-Eleven came along, fairly around the same time, actually. So I didn't spend a lot of time in the amateur ranks because they wanted to race in Europe, and I was already over there. And so that worked out pretty well because they started changing their program from racing the domestic calendar to racing the bigger races in Europe. And they wanted to do the Tour of Italy and needed another guy at the last minute. So that's when I got a chance, and that was my first real big team was 7-Eleven, actually, which was the biggest team in the United States.
Well, I was going to say, you're hooked up with the Yankees.
That was pretty good.
Yeah. And some of the guys on that team, you had Davis Finney and Ron Kiefel and all those boys.
Yeah, Andy Hampton and Jeff Pierce, Alexi Graywall, and Eric Hyden. And, they were all the best. apart from Greg Lamont,
Yeah.
they were all the best guys in the United States, came through that program at one time or another, and that evolved into the Motorola cycling team.
Right. Now, what was the response of the Europeans? Because really, you guys were pioneers, an American team over there. Did you guys get much respect?
Well, initially there was some resistance, and especially in Italy, where we did most of our races because we had an Italian co-sponsor.
Yeah.
And we were sort of based in northern Italy. So the Italians had a really traditional system of racing where there was one leader of each team, and everybody worked for that one guy. And we didn't have anybody that was strong enough to be the leader. We all were sort of taking our chances as we went along. And it was just around the same time, two teams from Colombia started to race in the amateur races in Europe, and they were absolutely phenomenal climbers. And we were a little bit more all-around cyclists, even though Andy Hampson was a standout climber. The rest of us sort of just tried to get in breakaways. And I mean, there was a little bit of resistance. But honestly, we won 2 stages of the first pro race we did, the Tour of Italy. So after that, there's not really much you can say, and we did much better than the majority of the Italian teams in the race. So that's sort of over there. Once you put up, everyone shuts up. So it was interesting.
Hey, Bob, when you first got over there, I mean, you make it sound like a fairly smooth transition. I mean, you go over there with your tent, it's Club Med-like, and everything's good. But surely the language, the food, everything coming from the States must have been a little bit weird.
For me personally, it wasn't that. It wasn't that, big of a deal. I studied Spanish in high school, and so I had a rudimentary ability to communicate in Italian and Spanish and French also. So that helped me a lot.
Wow.
And my teammates, though, they struggled, and a lot of really, really good, I mean, way better than me, guys never.
They couldn't make it.
Materialized in Europe. They didn't, like you said, it was such a cultural shock to be over there, and it was so different. It had a very hard time. I really liked it. I didn't have any trouble at all. I never got homesick. I spent, 8-10 months over there without any trouble at all. And I would have preferred never to come back to the States to race and train. But, sometimes the team wanted us to, and I was like, I don't want to go back there.
If I go back, I got to go over to Kmart and eat Molina's burgers. I don't want to be.
I have to go hang out with Scott in Pittsburgh.
That is so funny.
Family would be following me around.
Bob, what are some of the funny things that happened to you guys as a team in terms of language? Was there any stuff where the team messed up and showed up at the wrong place at the wrong time, missed a race, missed a bus or a plane or anything like that?
Oh, we missed everything all the time.
Oh, did you really?
Oh, it was unbelievable. One time we got to the Tour of Britain, and our team manager had been thrown in jail for brawling in Denmark.
Okay.
And he never got there. So our bikes and the team cars and the mechanic never materialized, and the promoter just couldn't believe it. Phil Liggett was the commentator, and the promoter in England just could not believe it. They couldn't, and none of the other teams could believe it. So they got a bunch of stuff together for us, the other team.
Yeah.
And some bikes and, a follow car, some spare wheels, and literally a minute and a half before the race, these bagpipes were playing in Edinburgh, and it was like the Royal Scotland bagpipe marching band was playing, and all of the knuckleheaded Brits had their helmets off and all of that. And across the pitch, you could see a car going about 140 miles an hour. And I mean, an open field, and it just spinning all over the place. And I could see it was our team car. And it was our team manager driving like a lunatic.
Yeah.
And he got there. He was like, he pretended like nothing was wrong at all. He was 3.5 days late. And he jumped out of the car and gave us all our jerseys and and they held the race up for a few minutes so we could get our bikes off the top of the car.
Oh,
And that happened on a regular basis, but that was one of the more graphic instances. But we did really good in the race. We did good. We did good in that race.
go ahead, Huddle.
Bob, when you think back on all the guys you've been able to race and train with, I mean, I can't imagine the list of guys. I mean, guys like Sean Kelly. I'm some true legends. Who are the guys that stand out to you? Who are the guys that you got to know along the way?
Sean Kelly definitely is a really great guy. I mean, a lot of times the best cyclists, the top guys, are so serious and so focused. They can't interact with the rest of the peloton. On any given day, there's maybe 10 guys out of 200 that are competitive. And Sean was a rare guy that would crack jokes, hang out, tell stories, make fun of everybody, and then still be one of the 10 guys that was trying to win a race.
Yeah.
So Sean Kelly that's why his legend amongst the racers is so gigantic, is because he had time for everybody, he had time for the journalists, he had time for the fans, and he won huge races on a regular basis. It's a pretty cerebral sport, and especially you're on the bike 7-8 hours in a bike race. The best guys, they don't chit-chat a lot. They're trying to conserve as much energy as possible. And Sean Kelly was one of the more exuberant, just great guys. And ostensibly, we spoke the same language, but you'd have to ask him a lot of times what he had just said, because he had a really thick, like Flemish Irish brogue that it took a long time to cut through. But Sean Yates is another one like that. Greg Lamont, most certainly. This is an awesome guy. Some of the Italian racers, Giuseppe Saroni, really charismatic, just looked awesome on a bicycle, just unbelievably powerful. Mr. Lance Armstrong himself had a great chance during the end of my career to ride, train, and race with him, and he was like just a great kid and an unbelievable talent. Could
you tell right away that this kid had special talent?
Oh, yeah. I met him in like 1990 when he was, 17 or 18 years old. And Chris Carmichael, who was on 7-Eleven, as a teammate of mine, had been doing the national team coaching stuff for a couple of years when Lance came to his attention in the junior ranks.
Sure.
And Chris told me and Davis and Ron Kiefel and Jeff Pierce, he's like, there's a kid you can't believe. And Chris had never said that before, so we were like, all right, that's awesome. And then the first time I remember him racing was the World Championships I think it was in Japan. And he was a junior still, and he absolutely mutilated the field until the last half lap. And then he fell apart and didn't get a medal. But you could just see how strong he was. I mean, it was unbelievable. He took like 3/4 of a lap out of the peloton, and it took them the whole rest of the race to catch him.
Oh, my God.
And if he had any tactical sense whatsoever, he would have clobbered everybody the way he did just a couple years later in Norway at the 1993 World Championships when he beat all the pros. I think he was not quite 22 years old.
Right.
Just unbelievable. I mean, it was just like, this dude is going somewhere. And initially, he suffered in the big mountains. So
he was still a big kid from triathlon.
Yeah, he had been swimming.
Right.
He had been doing swim training.
Right.
Just 2 seasons before he won the World Championship. So that's an entirely different sport. So, it would be like a Formula One race car driver trying to win the Nordic World Ski Championship. So, it took him a while to transition, but I think even without him being sick, it would have happened anyways. Maybe not 5 tours, but he most certainly would have won the Tour de France if he hadn't gotten sick.
Now, there you bring it up. Is it the Tour de France? Because we saw a lot of that on Outdoor.
Well, I saw Lance do a commercial for some gigantic corporation, and he said Tour de France. I mean, no one goes to Notre Dame University It's Notre Dame. It's the United States of America.
Right.
The Fighting Irish, they don't say Notre Dame. It's
Right.
Notre Dame. So
The Tour de France.
it's got to be the Tour de France.
Hey, we own it. Now he's running 5 times in a row.
He can say it any way he wants.
Absolutely. What type of kid was he? Was he a little cocky, a little? How did he react with the older guys?
You want to know something that's interesting?
Yeah.
Is I got more grief from the knuckleheaded domestic pros
Yeah.
than I ever got from Lance. And Lance had the utmost of respect for Andy
Right.
Hampson and Greg Lamont and Ron Kiefel and
Right.
myself and Davis. He was, out of all of those guys, the guy with the most respect. So I never had any. I never got a sense that he was being boisterous or cocky or brash.
Right.
He raced that way.
Yeah.
But he was never spoke like that to any of us that I know of.
Well, I was going to say, if he never spoke like that, how did he get that rap early on? I mean, it seemed like that was his rap.
I'm sure amongst his competitors that he, offered no quarter whatsoever, and in cycling, it's a really tradition-bound sport, and so if you're not cut from the, classic mold, it's very evident that you stick out and you're different, and people like to apply a label to you. And there was, when he started to race in Europe, there was a little bit of from the big stars. They thought that Claudio Chiappucci, in particular, Italian guy, thought that Lance was had not applied himself to the edits and traditions of the sport to the extent where they would cooperate with him in a race-winning situation.
Right.
So that sort of gets extrapolated into the press.
Right.
And, you get a reputation. And I had a reputation for being, a drunken lunatic. But you can't race 100 races a year. You can't ride 25,000 miles in a year and, live up entirely to all the stories. It's impossible. There's not enough hours in the day.
You tried pretty hard, though.
I did my best. I did my best.
Hey,
I
now,
tried hard.
I know that people see at the tour, they see the guys leading the tour, and a lot of times they don't really get to see the guys who are part of the team, who go out hard early and then do their job and just try to finish before the cutoff time. Right. Isn't that called the bus? The guys on the bus.
Yeah, the bus.
The bus. But I don't think people realize that Miguel Indurain was one of the guys riding the bus with you back there.
He drove the bus for a while because he's so steady and powerful. For 5 years, we let him, drive the bus. He knew what the time was, and he was, he pushed a lot of wind out of the way too. So
he's a big guy.
There's two races. There's the guys trying to finish,
right?
Like might be a guy like Mario Cipollini,
right,
or Alessandro Patacchi, or Eric Zabel. Even these are huge, gigantic stars,
right? And
they win lots of races, even in the Tour. But once you get to the mountains, a different type of athlete takes over.
Sure.
And so even a great cyclist has to learn to limit his losses. And that's what makes cycling so unique, is that nobody is immune to suffering and real life-threatening danger from 1 minute to the next in a bike race. You can't even be Jan Ullrich or Lance Armstrong without crashing your brains out.
Right.
And what makes cycling so beautiful is to win, it's not that you're so superior, but it's that you're willing to get up each time you fall down and get shredded and keep on going. And so it's a constant reminder, cycling is, of,
your mortality.
What real life is.
Yeah.
It's not like a stadium, everybody's happy, and you have a winning team and all that stuff. It's just not like that. It's a lot more gritty and real, and to me, that's why it's so appealing.
To follow up with Miguel, were you surprised? I mean, Miguel, like you said, he was a guy leading the bus and pulling you guys so that you guys finished within the time frame to stay in the Tour. Then all of a sudden the guy wins 5 in a row. Were you surprised that all of a sudden he went from the bus to the limo?
Well, his director sportif, Miguel Echevarri, was real like Svengali, a real magician, and he recognized early on in Miguel's career what was necessary, and he knew that if he didn't fully develop Miguel's capacities before they started to exploit them, that Miguel would never reach his highest potential. So he brought him along very gradually. And even in the 90 Tour, he was still working for Pedro Delgado, his teammate who had won in 88.
Yeah.
And Miguel Indurain won his only mountain stage in his career at Luz Ardiden, just a couple seconds ahead of Greg LeMond in the 90 Tour. And that was when finally it was obvious Delgado wasn't going to win, so they gave him a little bit of his own chance to win, and he demonstrated unequivocally that he should be the protected rider.
Right.
But Miguel Echevarri understood that a larger physique that Miguel has needs time to develop. And then at the right moment, after he had a certain base, a certain volume of suffering, then they would pare down his physique. And that winter, he lost something like 8 or 9 kilos. And then he was able to still have the majority of his power intact because he had become so used to it. And what was left was, a 15-pound less frame to haul up all the mountains. And in 91, he killed everybody, and that went on for
5 straight.
5 years. Yeah. So that was, I think, it was.
Bob, you talk about that progression when you had Miguel Indurain after Delgado, and then you had Olano. It seemed like after Indurain, but Olano never really panned out.
Mm-hmm. He just, was a big guy, very powerful, but lacked a little bit of endurance and his muscle composition in the big mountains was more fast twitch and power oriented, and Miguel had a more. Most of the guys aren't that big that win the Grand Tours. Greg LeMond and Lance Armstrong and Bjarne Riis, very slight. Miguel and Olano have similar builds, but Miguel's muscle composition a little bit different, a little bit more efficient, and so he can stay with the climbers, especially after 10 days of hard racing.
Yeah.
If the Tour went straight into the mountains, Miguel Indurain might never have won. But because guys get really worn out in the first week of crosswinds, time trials, flat stages, rolling hills, it takes the edge off the climbers' potency in the mountains. Miguel would take 3-4 minutes out of them in the time trials, which Olano could do as well. But Olano would lose big time in the mountains.
God. Yeah, again, we're speaking with Bob Roll on the Legends of Cycling. Bob, when Lance decided to come back and race again, I know Chris Carmichael called you a couple times and said, hey, I'd like you to go train with Lance. But it's like, take us through that. When Carmichael called, you weren't that anxious to go, but then the man himself gave you a call.
Yeah, when Lance calls you, even if you're tired and even if you have, a different program.
Yeah.
I mean, at that point I was racing mountain bike.
Right.
And the first camp was scheduled at a time when I had a couple of races to go to, so I couldn't manage it. But the next one was just before the first Norba National that year, so I didn't have for a couple of weeks any races, and at that time it made a lot of sense. Plus, when Lance asks you to do something, it's hard to say no.
Right.
It's impossible, as a matter of fact.
So you went. So you guys spent about 8 days in Boone, North Carolina?
I think 8, 9, 10 days total with a travel day on each end. Yeah.
And did it ever not rain?
It didn't rain one day, and Lance got so excited we did 10 hours on the bike that day. We did, I swear to God, 140-mile training ride.
Could you tell pretty much right away that, okay, this guy is going to make it back?
Well, the first couple days, he was not happy to be there.
Yeah.
And he was not feeling good. And what I didn't know is he hadn't ridden his bike in almost 2 months.
Yeah.
And I thought I was doing pretty good.
You thought, hey, I'm kicking this guy's ass. I'm in good shape for mountain bike season.
Man, this guy's not that good. I should come back to roads.
Yeah.
No, I'm like, this dude is lagging. Yeah, that's really sweet, And then the third day was pretty even. And the fourth day, it was a massacre from there on. And he would just a light switch went on. And he was easy on the pedals, never breathing hard. You could just feel it riding next to him. By the end of the camp, I was a wreck. I was an absolute puddle of mud. He was on the Jazz. He won the Tour of Luxembourg just after that.
Yeah.
Got fourth in the Vuelta, fourth in the World Road Race and Time Trial.
Yep.
And he he was back big time, and even the world had just barely started to take notice of it, and they're like, okay, he's made a successful comeback. That's nice, But even then, it wasn't. He hadn't started winning the Tour,
right?
So it wasn't obvious, but to anybody except the guys that were next to him, then it was like, oh my God. And I wrote at the time, I said, look out. I said, there is a tornado blowing up from Texas. And, people ask me about it. They're like, what are you talking about? And I'm like, don't worry. I am telling you now, that dude is going to kill. Don't worry.
Now,
He's going to shred.
When you guys weren't on the bike, what were you doing?
We had a pretty serious regime going. We would, I wanted to sit around and tell stories, but Lance, he only has a limited tolerance for that. So it was like off the bike, shower, lunch, real quick,
Yeah.
and a light protein, high protein lunch, and then wash the bikes, do the laundry.
Yeah.
He would, and then come back to the cabin, and we had to drive, like half an hour into town to do this stuff. Because it was in the boonies on top of this hill. It was out there, and so that was like, oh my God, this is like work, and I couldn't see like Lance, he got a vision that of the future, and I just was like, this is more misery than I want to go back to Colorado where it's nice and dry is what I was wanting to do, but. We would do the chores and come back and rest for a little bit. He would be on the internet, and I'd be taking a 2-hour nap.
Right.
And then Chris would make us dinner and bed. That was it. And
Wow.
we would watch the VH1 was running these those VH1 specials where they Leif Garrett and Ozzy Osbourne, and Donny Osmond and Michael Jackson, where and then we had a good time watching those. Ted Nugent, and Lance is like,
the behind the music.
He's like, no, behind the music, exactly.
Yeah.
So we had fun, and it was nobody came to visit. We didn't ride with anybody else. It was probably the calmest 10 days in Lance's life because he likes a lot of chaos. He likes a lot of he likes a lot of stimulation all the time. And so I think that sort of existence was really good for Lance, and he was fit to be tied after that. He was chomping at the bit. So
when you guys were riding and you were going up in some of the old courses that were part of the old Tour de Pont, where there were still markings on the road for Lance, right?
Yeah. There was Lance Armstrong graffiti on the roads all over the place.
Was he pretty jazzed about that?
I believe he was.
That is
I think
great.
he was. He was riding fast. He was I don't know if it was that or just everything was coming back together. He started to get the feeling back, and so he started lighting up the road, and it was a fearsome transformation to watch. It was cool, but I never did the Tour du Pont,
right?
And I thank God I never had to do it after that training camp.
That's right.
He got all fired up. I'm like,
Huddle.
Hey, Bob, I think it goes without saying that if you're going to be a cyclist and if you're going to race the Grand Tours, you're going to have to work extremely hard.
Mm-hmm.
But when you look at someone like Lance, does he work significantly harder than everybody else, or is he just somehow that much better than everybody else? Because I don't know that it's possible to conceive of how great what he's done so far is and how great, anything he does from now on. I mean, 5 Tours de France in 5 years in a row and the possibility of a 6th and on and on and on. I mean, it's just inconceivable to me. I mean, how hard does he work compared to everybody else, and how much better is he than everybody else?
He's a few percentages points overall for cycling, physiologically and psychologically speaking, 1 or 2% more gifted. But that doesn't account for a 10% victory.
Right.
And the rest of that is all down to his work ethic, what he's willing to do, and how much he wants to win the Tour, how much is riding on it for him personally. And during a Grand Tour, what happens is you have this fatigue-induced amnesia, and you forget why you're on the bike. A lot of times it comes back to you at certain periods during the race, and usually, before Lance anyways, it was enough for, why you're there to try to win, to come back to you periodically. But Lance somehow, he doesn't have that. He doesn't have that debilitation where he's so fatigued that he forgets why he's there. He's just happy to get through each day. He still wants to win, even though he's just as tired as everybody else. And that psychological component is the difference you see between himself and Jan Ullrich or Ivan Mayo or Alexander Vinokurov or Tyler Hamilton. And you visit these guys 2 weeks into the race, and they're like the Walking Dead. They're like zombies.
Yeah.
Yeah.
They're like, I want to go home. They don't know why they're there. They're going through the motions. They're just like following the wheels in the peloton, praying to God they're going to survive. And even though Lance feels the same, he still remembers, what the stakes are, what he has riding on it. And believe me, they have a lot riding on it.
Oh, yeah.
Yeah.
I mean, and that gets him up in the morning in January to do 6 hours if it's on his schedule, when it's raining, when they're, reconning the course. He learned, I think, from triathlon and swimming, the importance of a specific training with like a huge peak in mind. And when I was a runner, we did a lot of interval training. We didn't race all that much, once a week, once every other week, but we did specific training drills to build up. And that ideological way of looking at a sport, he brought into cycling. And he races a lot less than anybody before him that had won the Tour.
Right.
And what he does is use those training times to go out and look at the courses, look at the climbs, learn the descents, learn the contours of the country. So when he gets to there, it's such a huge advantage to know what's coming. And if you know a flat section is coming on a climb in 3 kilometers and you're suffering like a monster, you will in 3Ks, 3,000 meters, if you can hang on, you'll get a respite. But if you don't know that, boom, you blow up right there and lose 6 minutes. So Lance has brought that in to cycling. And Greg Lamont, Eddie Merckx, Bernard Hinault, Miguel Indurain, they all brought their own evolution of the sport that they embodied. That's what enabled them to win multiple times the Tour de France. So, Lance has made a quantum leap in the way the world looks at trying to do well in the big races.
Bob, are you surprised? I mean, obviously Lance does go out and check out the courses beforehand. If someone's going to beat him, can they do that if they don't do the same thing? I'm surprised that more teams don't go out there and pre-ride all the courses, all the routes.
Absolutely. I mean, it's interesting when the Europeans they don't try everything like we do as Americans. They're not as willing to try new things as we are. Innovation is not they will do it when it's proved.
Right.
And
like Lamont with the helmet and the bars and all that stuff.
With the bars. Greg Lamont didn't win the Tour just on the last day in '89 on the Champs-Élysées. He took 4 minutes out of Laurent Fignon in the first-time trial that was 60 kilometers long.
Right.
And he still didn't get the bars.
That's a great point. That's a great point.
That 2.5 weeks to get some bars for Fignon.
Yeah. And he's still out of the saddle like an idiot going up and down.
He didn't believe. They still didn't believe.
That's amazing.
So, you would think that Jan Ullrich would go. And he's like, it's not necessary. Whoa.
Yeah.
It's like, all right, you kicked your ass so many times. What are you going to do next?
Yeah.
So they are more accepting of their fate as an athlete, and which, it's hard to convince Americans to do that. We always try whatever, a little thing new, a little thing different.
Hey, age group triathletes pre-ride every course they do. My 50-year-old granny is out there pre-riding the bike course, and these guys are going to the Tour de France, and they don't know the turns. And Jan Ulrich is sliding into the hay bales.
Yeah. Yeah, he's like, I must rest.
Must rest. That must be a problem. Go ahead, Huddle.
Well, it's a very long time.
Hey, Bob, talk a little bit about what the dynamics are going to be like this year at the Tour with the change in teams, and now you've got what appears to be the 5 sort of clear leaders / favorites on the road between Lance, Ulrich, Heras, Balaki, Hamilton, and Vinokurov is now on Ulrich's team. I mean, he was on Ulrich's team. He is on Ulrich's team, but how is all of that going to affect, especially with Heras gone now from Postal?
To me, that's one of the most significant differences in the whole landscape of professional cycling is Roberto Heras riding for formerly Once, now Liberty Seguros, along with Isidro Nozal and Igor Gonzalez de Galdiano. I mean, that's a fabulous formation. And Manolo Sáenz, the director sportif, runs a very tight ship there. And he's one of the few real innovators in European cycling because he never raced a bike. He came to cycling from a sports and physiology background. So I think that team is going to attack right from the beginning, and Postal will really have their work cut out for them. And Roberto Heras, I think, has learned a lot from Lance. So as long as he can articulate that and have the Liberty Seguros riders sort of follow a similar program, they'll be very, very dangerous. He'll suffer on this year's Tour because it's not as mountainous as it has been. So, I mean, that's just one wild card. I mean, if he hooks up with Jan Ulrich in a stage that Postal has lost control of, there are going to be some real fireworks in the Tour, and it's going to be a very, very hard race. And if they can pull it off, it would be one of the greatest feats in the history of all athletic, of all sporting contests. But it's incredibly competitive. Everyone, all of those guys you mentioned, are just concentrated on the Tour, and it's not like 2 or 3 guys. It's like 15 guys, and all of the French guys. So you have, 1,000 pros, and in the day, just a few years ago, maybe 2 or 3 or 5 at the most were concentrating on doing well on the Tour. And now you have 500 guys that are all trying to do well in that one race because it is the biggest cycling event. And it is so important, not just for the 3 weeks in July, but for the whole season. And a stage win in the Tour justifies the budget of the team for the whole year. So, for better or worse, the Tour has become the pinnacle of cycling, and the only race that everyday people take note of. Right. And the big cycling fans will watch all the races. Sure. Yeah. But the whole world, the only race they tune into is the Tour. Right. And so the stakes get a little bit higher each year. And Lance is really going to face a huge challenge, not just from Jan Ulrich, but like you said, from Tyler, Sevilla. Oscar Sevilla could be good also. And what's interesting is each team, at least 5 teams, have 2 guys that are solid GC contenders. So, Telecom has Vinokurov and Ulrich. That's very hard. Sevilla and Hamilton for Phonak, and Liberty Seguros with Heras and Isidro Nozal. I mean, there's a lot of teams like that. So if Lance wins again,
it's going to be unbelievable.
It's going to be truly an amazing accomplishment. That just is in the cycling context. That doesn't, to begin to speak of Lance's personal history outside of cycling, which is a whole nother world.
One of the things that Lance mentioned last time we had him on, we talked about the, Jan Ulrich and the T-Mobile team with Vinokurov, and his concern, he says, hey, I wouldn't want to be on that team. There's too many there's too many guys. There's too
Right.
many leaders. The way it works is you got to have one guy everybody works for, and that's it. He says, on that team, you think the other guys are going to go to the front and work for Jan during the first week, or are they going to sit back and wait to see what happens and see if Jan's on form?
Well, Vino Kurov will for sure.
He'll go to the front.
Oh, absolutely.
He'll work for him.
Yeah.
Oh, absolutely. Like in the Olympics in 2000, Vino Kurov was the strongest guy.
Yeah.
But Jan Ulrich was the big star of the team, even though Vino Kurov was a Kazakhstan athlete.
Right.
He still did all the work for Jan Ulrich, and that's sort of the Eastern Bloc mentality also. You're paying my bills. I'm doing what you're saying.
Huh.
And
Yeah.
I guarantee you Vino Kurov will follow team orders in the Tour de France.
Wow.
And that Jan Ulrich will be
He'll be in
on
shape.
form,
Yeah.
dangerous, and Vino Kurov will be his number one ally. I would, like Lance said, I would worry about other guys
On their team.
like Paolo Salvadelli, who won the Giro the year before
Right.
last.
Right.
Yeah.
Beat Tyler.
A guy like that, he definitely is not going to work.
Right.
Eric Zabel's not going to work.
Right.
His lead-out guy's not going to work. So, even if you have three guys that aren't going to work, you're in trouble.
Right.
You have all 9 guys have to be committed to the same thing. But Vino Kurov is not one of them that you have to worry about.
Hey, Bob, what about a guy like Balaki? I mean, here's a guy who seemed like he was actually somewhat challenging Lance last year, and then the big crash, and now he's moved to a much smaller team. Is he considered damaged goods now, or is everyone considering him still a major threat?
That's the most inexplicable and bizarre thing I've ever seen in cycling, is to join Brioche Boulanger from the Once team.
Yeah.
It's like unless they're paying him a ton of money, even if they are, it's as if he's decided to give up his chance of winning beforehand. You need a strong team.
Right.
Exactly.
You don't need a team of guys that have been given an automatic entry into the Tour and never had to get hard, get tough, and earn it like everybody else. So that, to me, was the strangest thing I've ever heard in cycling. That was the most bizarre. I couldn't believe it. I thought it was like an April Fool's joke when I read it. I said, that's impossible.
Hey, Bobby, was there a
Plus,
point?
it's a French
Yeah.
team. He's a Spanish guy. It's
Yeah.
the most bizarre thing.
Yeah.
What
And
was
he's moving from Once. It was bizarre.
Yeah.
I just thought, well,
The
there
only
must be
thing I
something
can-
there.
The only thing I can make sense out of is he was worried that Saenz would not get a sponsor, and so he took the best, financial offer he could in the meantime.
Just the safety. Yeah.
Yeah, and he wanted to cash in on, his
How well he was
3
doing.
podiums
Sure.
and his unfortunate crash in last year's Tour. So, from that point of view, I can understand it. But a guy like Manolo Saenz is going to get a sponsor. There's no doubt about it. He's like the most famous director sportif in all of Spain. He's going to have a team. And it was odd to me that he didn't have a clause with Boulanger saying if Saenz found a sponsor before January 1st, he would, be allowed to sign for that team. So,
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, that was just very odd.
Bob, was there a point at this year's Tour, obviously with how tough it was for Lance, with crashing and having that crash early on and coming off the crash at Dauphiné, was there a point where you thought he would lose or could
No.
lose?
I never thought he would.
Even when it got to within 15 seconds and going to a final time trial?
It's funny.
Yeah.
I went around to all of the journalists in the TV compound.
Yeah.
And I said Lance is going to win. And, we spent a lot of time together, all the journalists.
Right.
And the Dutch and Belgian and German journalists speak very good English. So we had a lot of long discussions. And they were certain, I mean, as if it was written in stone that Ulrich was going to win the Tour.
Sure.
They were convinced. They knew. And I was the only guy in the compound to say that Lance is going to beat him.
Right.
Lance will win. None of them believed. It was very odd. And I never forget talking to Eric Breukink, a great Dutch cyclist who now works for Dutch TV. And the Dutch people had already started saying that Ulrich was going to win. And I had heard that that's what they were saying on Dutch TV. And I told Eric, I said, you are making a huge mistake. Lance is going to take time out of Ulrich when he needs to and win this race. And it was like speaking Martian. But I knew he would win, and when I would see him and talk to him,
Yeah.
I knew that he was suffering,
Yeah.
but there was a resolve that looking at Jan Ulrich and talking with him, or Vino Kurov, or Tyler, that they didn't have the same. It wasn't in their eyes. And I would ask Lance, and his eyes, it would be a glint in his eyes, and even when he was, suffering so bad and it looked so desperate, he knew what had to be done. And if he had to give a little bit of time on Trois du Mans, that one stage,
Sure.
he would give it. If he needed, the only thing that made it seem tenuous was the time he lost in the first long time trial.
Right.
And he's the type of guy that will rectify a situation when it needs to be and let it slide when it doesn't. And I believed he was going to win, and no, not even the two Brits that I work with. They started to hedge.
Really?
Dance around a little bit. And
Ah.
I was like, every pre-race show, I said Lance was going to win. But I knew he was. I knew he was going to.
Hey, Bob, speaking of those two Brits that you work with, this whole interview that we've been talking to you, have you been talking? Have your hands been still at all?
Well, I'm holding the phone with one, so
yeah,
that one has been still. The Brits, but they don't like it when you use. Huh?
They don't like Americans to talk with their hands.
No, they don't like that. They think that there's going to be a fist fight.
Well, I know that Liggett always puts one arm behind his back when he talks.
Well, yeah. That's I don't know. They're the classically, droll BBC school of journalism, and if you watch the British commentators, it's like watching paint dry.
Oh, they're awful.
The Brits that we have are awesome in comparison.
Oh, I know.
And Phil is a great guy. Paul's an awesome guy. They're just a blast to be around. They make that job a lot more pleasurable, I assure you.
Hey, have you seen anything, Bobby, that the one stage where Lance had to avoid crashing
Balaki.
and avoid Balaki and go across the field and somehow it's like a 5-foot drop, jump off the bike and get back on? When you were calling that and watching that, were you amazed that he was able to do that and not go down?
But just jumping up and down, like screaming, everybody. And at the finish line, there's a tribunal of like 100 TV stations.
Right.
And there's these little cabins where, 3 people sit in front of a monitor. And when Balaki crashed, you couldn't believe the scream that went up.
Yeah.
Simultaneously from all of the commentary positions. And that scream, it turned into a roar as Lance jumped off, avoided the crash, rode through the field, jumped off of his bike, hopped the ditch.
Right.
Boom! The breakaway just barely missed clocking him.
Right.
He jumps back on his bike. They're still chasing Vino Kurov at this point. Balaki, is just wailing on in the gutter.
Sure.
With 3 broken bones.
Right.
And it was phenomenal. And it seemed like the tour this year, that sort of thing happened every single day.
So much drama.
And it was just a building tsunami of hysteria until the Luz Ardiden stage, And when Lance got his handlebar caught in the musette and crashed and slipped off his pedal, and then it was just like, oh my God.
And Ulrich kept the attack going.
Yeah.
Yeah.
We asked Lance, did Ulrich wait for you? And he paused for about 3 minutes before he Hey, Bobby, having it be so close, having the race so close, did that just, you think that was a wake-up call for Lance? That he's just got to work harder?
I think that it was so close because Lance had a lot of distractions, obviously in his personal life.
Sure.
Leading up to it and even afterwards. I think also his crash in the Dauphiné.
Yes.
He didn't say very much about that.
Oh, he talked to us about it. Yeah, he was toasted.
Torn to shreds in that.
Yeah.
It displaced his hip socket and his spine, and
he had a big hole in his elbow, the size of a quarter.
yeah, he had to get stitches and be on antibiotics because he had such a huge gash in his arm. So, I mean, you crash your bike going almost 50 miles an hour with basically a T-shirt and cutoffs on. It's just not like you. And this is just a few days before the tour started. So
Right.
A normal person would be absolutely mutilated if you put him through the same thing.
Yeah.
And Lance, being the athlete that he is incredibly agile, recovers like nobody else. But still, a lot of things prevented him from being at his best before the race ever started. And he was playing catch-up, throughout the first couple weeks. And it even looked as if until the first long time trial, it was the same Lance. He was totally invincible. He's going to kill everybody. And then all of a sudden, oh, my God. They hadn't gotten to the mountains yet, but the peloton was hopeful.
Right. You
there
could
were some
tell.
grumblings that he might not be invincible.
They could smell it.
Yeah, so everybody ratcheted up their games. The Euskaltel guys attacked like crazy. Virenque did big attacks. Vino Kurov attacked hard. Beloki was attacking Ulrich. And they might have been a little bit more reluctant to attack if Lance hadn't lost that time to Ulrich in the first long time trial.
Sure.
And I don't believe that he needs to change anything that dramatically to still win the race. He just needs to have a little bit better luck leading up to it. But that's the thing. You do 5 tours, that's 150 days of racing.
Yeah.
I mean,
things are going to happen.
I think in that much amount of time that nothing's going to happen is really phenomenal. And once it starts to go wrong, I mean, it's just like all of the built-in karma just catches up to you. And Miguel Indurain, nothing went wrong for him in 5 tours. Not one flat tire.
Right.
Not one crash.
Amazing.
He never got a head cold. He never got food poisoning.
Sure.
They never
And then
lost.
there's Tyler Hamilton.
Yeah, that's it. Lance talked about Tyler. He says, dude, you got to be watching where you're going. You're going down way too often.
That's true.
Hey, Bobby, we want to thank you so much for staying up.
Thanks so much for spending the time.
No commercials, boys. We didn't do any commercials. We just blew that crap off.
Sorry about that.
No, we get Bob Roll on. We don't do commercials. We'll pay back. We don't do. Hey, Bob, thank you so much for taking so much time with us.
Thank you.
All right, Bob Roll, one of the legends of Cycling Huddle.
Yo.
Hey, thanks so much.
No problem, man.
Thank you so much for listening to this edition of Babbittville Classic Rewind. And don't forget to check out our huge library of interviews with the most decorated triathletes in history on Breakfast with Bob.
Ask me what I want to be, and I will say I will be